Weddings are supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful life, a day of promises, celebration, and new beginnings. But for Simone Rivers, her brother's wedding became something else entirely. The day the world she trusted shattered in an instant. Imagine standing in a ballroom filled with roses, laughter, and chandeliers, only to step onto a balcony and witness the two people you trusted most wrapped in a secret, forbidden kiss. Your husband and your soon-to-be sister-in-law. The bride, in her wedding dress, your husband, whispering that you were nothing but a tool. But the real twist? The groom, Simone's brother, already knew. What followed wasn't a wedding, it was an orchestrated takedown. A meticulously planned exposure of betrayal, conspiracy, corporate espionage, and a hidden past stretching back decades. And at the center of it all stood one woman trying to survive heartbreak, lies, and a truth far darker than infidelity. The day began like a fairy tale. One of those impossibly perfect mornings where the sky looks freshly painted, and every detail feels touched by magic. Simone Rivers walked into the grand ballroom of the five-star Atlanta hotel feeling proud, excited, and a little sentimental. Her brother Julian, the man who raised her after their parents died, the man who had been her protector, mentor, and unshakable safe place, was finally getting married. Everywhere Simone looked, there were white satin ribbons, towering floral arrangements, and chandeliers sparkling like captured stars. Musicians played soft strings, and guests floated around in polished smiles. Simone had her husband, Miles, beside her, the man she believed was her rock, the man she trusted completely. As he gently wrapped an arm around her and whispered about how beautiful the couple looked, she felt something warm settle in her chest. She thought her life was whole. She thought her family was finally complete. But life has a way of cracking open when you least expect it, and sometimes the fracture begins with something as small as the absence of a familiar face. Miles disappeared from her side for a little too long. At first, she brushed it off. A work call, a restroom break, a quick step outside. Nothing alarming. But a quiet instinct tugged at her, guiding her toward the long corridor near the garden balcony, a place where the music faded and whispers carried. The moment Simone reached the cracked open balcony door, her world froze in place. There, under the soft afternoon light, stood Miles. And Eliza, the bride, still in her untouched white wedding gown. Their bodies were wrapped around each other in an embrace far too intimate, far too familiar. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was betrayal unfolding in its rawest form, shameless, deliberate, and already too practiced to be an accident. Simone's breath snagged in her throat, her vision blurring with tears she didn't even feel forming. But the words that followed shattered her far more violently than the kiss she'd witnessed. She heard her husband mocking her, calling her a tool, bragging that he married her only for status, calling her brother a lovesick idiot, promising Eliza that once a baby was produced, he would get rid of her. Each sentence sliced through her with a precision almost cruel in its clarity. Simone felt her knees weaken, her body shaking as nausea rolled up her chest. She wanted to storm in, scream, break something, break them, but shock held her still. Her heart didn't just break. It collapsed inward, crushed under the weight of trust, shattered without warning. She turned away, stumbling blindly down the corridor, tears falling in silent streams as her world, marriage, family, safety, dissolved into dust around her. She didn't know how long she wandered before colliding into someone, a familiar warmth, a familiar scent. It was Julian. When Simone looked up at him with swollen eyes and trembling hands, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing with the raw grief of someone betrayed on every level. She expected him to erupt in fury, to storm toward the balcony, to dismantle the wedding in rage. But instead, Julian held her with a calmness that felt almost unreal. He listened to every word, every sob, every broken sentence about Miles and the bride. And when she finished, when she expected him to crumble beside her, he simply wiped her tears and whispered something that stunned her into silence. "It's okay. The main act is about to begin." Those words didn't make sense, not then. Her brother's steady composure, his eerie confidence, the faint glimmer of something cold and controlled in his eyes. Simone couldn't understand any of it. But Julian didn't wait for questions. He led her into the groom's private waiting room, locked the door, and revealed the truth that turned the nightmare into something far more sinister. He already knew. He had known about the affair for months. He had known about the conspiracy behind it. He had known about the dangers circling their family. And instead of stopping the wedding, he had transformed this day into a meticulously designed trap, a stage where every liar, every traitor, and every hidden enemy would expose themselves under the bright lights of their own arrogance. As Julian revealed the photos, the investigator reports, the secret emails outlining Miles and Eliza's plan to infiltrate and destroy the Rivers Group, Simon's heartbreak twisted into something fiercer, a blend of rage, disbelief, and a dawning realization that she and her brother were standing inside the opening scene of a much larger war. Julian had protected her without her knowing. He had protected their parents' legacy too. And now, he needed her to play her role, the heartbroken wife, the unsuspecting sister, the emotional spark that would keep Miles and Eliza unsuspecting until the moment the trap snapped shut. Simone wiped her tears, straightened herself, and agreed. She didn't do it because she was strong, she did it because she had no other choice. Betrayal has a way of burning away innocence, leaving behind a hardened resolve. Together, they stepped out of the waiting room and back into the glittering ballroom. The same ballroom where guests applauded, photographers flashed cameras, and the wedding march began. But behind the music and roses and celebration, something else was coming. Not a ceremony, but a reckoning. And Simone, still trembling, still wounded, still processing the collapse of her marriage, walked toward it with her brother at her side, unaware that this wedding would not only expose infidelity, but ignite a chain of revelations reaching far beyond the balcony kiss that shattered her heart. Julian's calmness was more unsettling than the betrayal itself. As the music swelled outside and the wedding guests waited eagerly for the ceremony to begin, the groom, a man minutes away from taking vows, stood in the dim groom's suite explaining how he had been living inside a storm Simone never even saw forming. Under the warm yellow light, Julian told her about the first whispers of doubt, the subtle glances between Miles and Eliza, the oddly timed questions Eliza asked about Rivers Group finances. He noticed everything, the too sweet smiles, the strange coincidences, the invisible threads connecting her fiancé and Simone's husband. Most people would have brushed these off as paranoia, but Julian was not most people. He had been responsible for their family since he was a teenager. He had learned to read danger the way others read weather patterns. So when the air around Eliza and Miles shifted, Julian launched a quiet investigation, not out of jealousy, but survival. And what he uncovered over the next 3 months was not just infidelity, but a conspiracy so calculated it felt almost theatrical. Secret meetings, money transfers, strategic positioning inside the company, and emails detailing a plan to infiltrate Rivers Group from the inside and dismantle it piece by piece. Simone sat in stunned silence as Julian laid everything out. Photos of Miles and Eliza in luxury hotels, private investigators' reports tracking their movements, financial records showing unexplained transactions, and most damning of all, a multi-phase plan that painted her marriage as nothing but a stepping stone in a larger corporate trap. Every detail made her chest tighten. Every revelation redefined the life she thought she understood. Her husband hadn't simply cheated. He had targeted her. Eliza hadn't simply fallen out of love with her fiancé. She had been playing a long game to infiltrate a wealthy family. And behind them, operating like a puppeteer, was a man Julian referred to only as the Fox, a name Simone would soon learn. Julian explained how he had been gathering evidence quietly, knowing that if he confronted Eliza or Miles too soon, the real threat, the invisible mastermind behind them, would slip away unscathed. Stopping a wedding does nothing, Julian said. But exposing a system? That changes everything. The wedding wasn't proceeding because Julian ignored the betrayal. The wedding was proceeding because it was the only stage large enough, public enough, and undeniable enough to force the entire truth into the light, with no escape for anyone involved. But Simone still didn't understand one thing. Why hadn't he told her? Why had he let her go on believing in love, warmth, and loyalty when he knew the truth would crush her? Julian's expression softened as he answered, and for the first time that day, she saw the weight he had been carrying. He hadn't kept it from her to spare her feelings. He kept it from her to protect the plan. If she had known, her behavior would have changed. A single wrong glance, a fractured smile, a tremor in her voice, and Miles, the more paranoid of the two, would have sensed something. And if Miles sensed something, Eliza would panic. And if Eliza panicked, the shadow behind them would disappear before Julian could expose him. "I needed you untouched by suspicion," he said. "I needed your heartbreak to be real when the truth revealed itself." Only real emotion can fool people who are already living a lie. The cruelty of those words wasn't Julian's. It was the cruelty of the situation. Simone understood now. Her pain was the final missing ingredient in the trap. Her tears weren't just heartbreak, they were camouflage. And watching her brother, the calm strategist who had built everything they had, she realized that betrayal hadn't broken him. It had awakened something far more dangerous. Purpose. Julian finally revealed the full scope. The assets had already been moved into protected trusts. The projects Eliza and Miles wanted were decoys, and the ballroom was laced with hidden cameras and microphones ready to capture every incriminating detail. The betrayal was only the opening act. The real show, the exposure, the downfall, the trap snapping shut, would unfold in front of hundreds of witnesses. Simone felt a strange mix of devastation and awe. Her brother had turned heartbreak into strategy, tears into weapons, a wedding into a battlefield. And now she stood beside him, trembling but determined, ready to play her part in the quiet war that was about to erupt. When they slipped out of the groom's suite and walked back toward the glowing hall, she could feel the weight of the moment sinking into her bones. The doors opened, the music intensified, and the crowd rose to its feet. Eliza, radiant and unsuspecting, took Julian's hand for the walk down the aisle. Miles, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled everything, watched from across the room. But neither of them realized that the real ceremony today wasn't a wedding, it was an execution. And Julian Rivers, calm, poised, unflinching, was about to let the world watch the truth burn. As the ceremony began, the ballroom shimmered with elegance and bliss, or at least the illusion of it. Guests leaned forward with soft smiles, cameras poised to capture what they believed was the perfect union of a perfect couple. Simone sat in the front row, Miles' arm draped around her shoulders like a serpent coiling around prey, whispering sweet lies meant to paint him as the devoted husband he never truly was. She said nothing, leaning into him with just the right amount of fragile warmth to keep him unsuspecting. But behind her calm expression, her pulse hammered in her ears. On stage, Julian stood tall beside Eliza, who wore an angelic smile so convincing that even seasoned actors would have applauded her performance. Yet every now and then, Simone caught the faint flicker of nerves in Eliza's eyes, the twitch of someone who sensed danger but couldn't trace its scent. The master of ceremonies praised their timeless love story, and the crowd sighed dreamily. But beneath the chandeliers, beneath the applause and romantic music, an invisible tension grew thicker by the second. Julian had set the trap. And now, piece by piece, it was beginning to tighten. The first fracture came when a middle-aged woman stormed forward just as the couple prepared to exchange rings. Her voice cut sharply through the ceremony, stopping everything. Gasps rippled across the hall as she confronted Eliza, revealing herself as the mother of Eliza's real fiancé, a man Eliza had been engaged to for years before abandoning him for Julian's wealth. She threw photos across the stage, each one a damning snapshot of Eliza's hidden life. The engagement party, the affectionate embraces with her former lover, the financial transactions she'd taken from him, even while planning to marry Julian. Shock spread like wildfire. Guests whispered, pointed, recoiled. Eliza stammered denials, trying desperately to maintain her composure, but even her family actors, hired to portray the perfect in-laws, were too stunned to continue the charade. Panic danced behind her eyes. Julian remained chillingly calm, watching her unravel with the quiet patience of a man who had been waiting for this moment. And when Eliza dramatically collapsed onto the stage in a fake faint, hoping pity would erase the evidence, Julian leaned down and whispered something only Simone could see from her seat. He knew she was pretending. Then came the second fracture, the moment Julian lifted the microphone and announced there was another special guest, whose presence was essential. The stage lights swung toward the audience and landed on Miles. The room turned toward him like a shifting tide. Simone felt him stiffen under the spotlight. Julian called him forward with warm praise that was laced with venomous irony, praising his talent, his devotion, his love for Simone. Every compliment was a countdown, a fuse burning closer to explosion. When Miles hesitated, Simone gently nudged him with a convincing tremor in her voice, making him believe she was simply emotional from the ceremony. She played her role perfectly. On stage, Julian wrapped an arm around his shoulders as if they were brothers. And then, with perfect timing, he dropped the spark that ignited the entire room. Hidden cameras activated. Screens flickered awake. The balcony footage appeared for everyone to see. Miles and Eliza kissing passionately in her wedding gown, mocking Simone, mocking Julian, mocking the family they pretended to love. Their voices echoed across the hall. She's nothing but a tool. Julian is a lovesick idiot. Everything will be ours soon. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned to outrage. Chairs scraped. Insults flew. Eliza bolted upright from her fake faint, horrified. Miles staggered backward, denying, begging, reaching for explanations that didn't exist. But the room wasn't done with them, not even close. Julian raised his hand, silencing the chaos with nothing but authority. He revealed that what everyone had just witnessed was only the beginning. Their affair was merely the smallest visible crack of a much larger conspiracy, an organized attempt to infiltrate Rivers Group and destroy it from within. He lifted a folder filled with printed emails, bank transfers, and project plans that the hidden mastermind had given to Elisa and Miles. Every page displayed on the giant screens, every lie laid bare. The wedding had officially transformed into a public courtroom, and the defendants, Miles and Elisa, were trapped between hundreds of witnesses and the truth they could no longer escape. Simone, watching from the front row, felt her heartbreak shift into something steadier, stronger, a resolve she never knew she had. Her brother had not just exposed two cheaters. He had exposed the opening chapter of a war against an enemy who thought he could dismantle their family's legacy. As the ballroom descended into chaos, and the lights flashed against tear-streaked faces and trembling hands, Simone realized one thing with crushing clarity. This wedding was never meant to join lives. It was meant to end lies. And the real storm, the one that had been brewing for years, was only beginning to break. The ballroom was still shaking from the explosive reveal when Julian stepped forward again, his expression transforming from betrayed groom to cold strategist. His voice cut through the chaos with unnerving steadiness. "What you've seen," he said, holding the microphone with deliberate precision, "is only the surface. A symptom. Not the disease." The guests, already stunned by the infidelity, now fell into an uneasy silence, sensing that something even darker was coming. Miles and Eliza froze, cornered between humiliation and dread, their faces drained of color. Julian lifted the folder of documents, the ones Simone had briefly seen in the groom's suite, and held them up like evidence in a courtroom. "Behind this affair," he continued, "behind every lie, every stolen detail, every whispered plan, is someone who believed he could gut my family from the inside." The screens flickered as pages of internal company maps, siphoned financial reports, and coded emails appeared in sharp detail. "This wasn't about love," Julian said. "This was a calculated infiltration designed to dismantle the Rivers Group. The crowd murmured again, fear and fascination mixing in the air. Betrayal was one thing. Conspiracy was something else entirely. As Julian flipped through the pages, each slide revealed a deeper layer. Evidence of planned embezzlement, ghost projects meant to reroute funds, and internal sabotage strategies timed to destroy the company's credibility. But what gripped the audience was not just the complexity of the scheme, it was the chilling precision. Miles and Eliza weren't acting alone. They were executing instructions from someone wealthier, more powerful, and far more dangerous. Julian paused on a page that showed a name the family had hoped to never see again. Harrison, the president of the Golden Crest Group. The same man who once coerced and manipulated Rivers Group's father. The same man whose unethical business tactics were whispered across boardrooms. A man known for devouring smaller companies to expand his empire. Gasps rippled through the hall as Julian revealed that Harrison had promised Miles a director position and promised Eliza wealth and power, all in exchange for destroying the Rivers' legacy. Simone felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was generational vengeance, a continuation of wounds that had begun long before she was old enough to understand them. Spotlights shifted toward the VIP section, where Harrison sat in a sharp gray suit, beads of sweat forming at his temples. The confident, untouchable titan of industry now looked like a cornered predator, still dangerous but exposed. He attempted to stand and leave, but Julian's voice lashed through the room. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Harrison?" "The best part is still coming." Two plainclothes detectives appeared beside Harrison, blocking his exit. The room fell into a thick silence as Julian played audio captured from secret recordings, Harrison discussing Rivers Group like prey. "She's naive, easy to manipulate. Once she signs, we drain everything." His voice echoed across the ballroom, venomous and unmistakable. Eliza swayed in shock. Miles crumpled under the weight of the truth he helped carry. And the guests, many of whom revered the Rivers family for decades, stared at Harrison with disgust and disbelief. The trap had closed not just on two traitors, but on the mastermind himself. Simone watched it all unfolding with a strange mix of fury and heartbreak. Her marriage, her trust, her very identity had been used as stepping stones in a stranger's cold, calculated empire-building. Julian lowered the microphone, his voice softening just slightly. "My family has already suffered because of you once," he said, locking eyes with Harrison. "You took advantage of a man, my father, who trusted you. And now you tried again, using my sister as collateral damage." The recordings ended, and the hush that followed was deafening. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath as the detectives placed a firm hand on Harrison's shoulder. Miles and Eliza, trembling and broken, watched helplessly as the true puppeteer was finally dragged into the light. The wedding ceremony, once imagined as a joyful celebration, had transformed into the exposure of a criminal network, a reckoning decades in the making. And through it all, Simone stood in the front row, hands trembling, heart bruised but unbroken. Betrayal had dragged her into darkness, but truth, painful, brutal truth, was pulling her back out. And as Harrison was escorted away and the ballroom erupted into whispers and disbelief, Simone realized that her life had changed forever. The shadows had finally shown their faces. But what she didn't know was that this revelation was only the midpoint of her journey. The past hadn't finished speaking yet, and some secrets were still waiting to rise from the ashes. When the ballroom screens went dark and the final recording of Harrison's voice faded into silence, the atmosphere shifted from shock to something far heavier, a collective reckoning. Guests whispered urgently, some stood in uneasy disbelief, and others simply stared as if they had witnessed the downfall of the empire right before their eyes. On stage, Eliza trembled like a porcelain doll beginning to crack, her once perfect makeup smudged into streaks of panic and denial. Miles, in his disheveled suit and sweat-soaked shirt, looked less like the polished architect Simone had once admired and more like a man who had glimpsed the ruins of his own future in real time. Meanwhile, Harrison, the corporate titan who had built a reputation on power and fear, sat stone still, cornered by the detectives flanking him. He looked smaller now, fragile even, as if the bright lights had stripped him of every ounce of the influence he wielded so ruthlessly. And in the center of the stage stood Julian, the one smiling groom who had transformed into a force of nature. He scanned the room, his gaze steady, unshaken. "This is what happens," he said quietly, "when arrogance underestimates truth." It wasn't just a statement, it was a verdict. But the storm wasn't done. As the tension reached its breaking point, Eliza abruptly lurched to her feet with the desperation of someone drowning. Her hair, once styled to perfection, now fell in tangled waves around her pale face. With trembling hands, she grabbed at her dress, stumbling forward as if begging for mercy, or perhaps searching for a final escape from humiliation. Guests recoiled when they saw the wild, frantic glint in her eyes. "This is all her fault!" she screamed suddenly, pointing a quivering finger directly at Simone. If she hadn't interfered, if she hadn't ruined things, none of this would be happening. Her voice cracked into shrill panic. "I was supposed to have everything, everything." The room erupted into chaos, security rushing forward, but Elisa was already unraveling completely. She snatched a sharp hairpin from her bridal updo and, in a split-second burst of madness, hurled herself toward Simone. Gasps filled the hall. Simone froze. She saw the flash of metal, felt her breath stop, felt her life stutter on a thin line between present and gone. But before the hairpin reached her, a body threw itself between them, Miles. The sharp pin tore into Miles' shoulder, ripping fabric and flesh in a bright slash of red. His cry of pain echoed across the hall. Eliza stumbled back in shock as if she herself couldn't comprehend what she had just done. Miles pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder, but his eyes, for the first time that night, held no arrogance, no deceit, no manipulative charm. They held something else entirely, regret, genuine regret. He looked at Simone, his breathing shaky. "Are you okay?" he whispered, voice strained. In that moment, the man who had used her, betrayed her, mocked her, the man she thought she knew, looked utterly defeated. Not because he'd been caught. Not because the plan had failed. But because, in the one moment that mattered, he instinctively moved to shield the woman he had once destroyed. Was it love? Was it guilt? Was it redemption? Simone had no answer. She only knew that the blow meant for her had landed on him instead. Security detained Eliza, now screaming incoherently as she was dragged away. The detective stepped toward Harrison. The hall buzzed with disbelief. And Julian rushed to Simone's side, his steady voice trembling for the first time as he asked if she was hurt. Within minutes, the ballroom transformed into a whirlwind of flashing lights, urgent whispers, and the cold, clinical movements of law enforcement. Harrison was escorted out in handcuffs, his once towering presence crushed under years of hidden crimes finally dragged into daylight. Eliza was taken to a psychiatric ward for evaluation, her mind shattered under the weight of her own schemes. Miles, bleeding but conscious, was taken to the infirmary, still insisting Simone let him apologize, though she couldn't bring herself to hear the words. The wedding guests exited in a daze, unsure whether they had attended a ceremony, a scandal, or the climax of a corporate crime drama. And when the last stranger left and the ballroom fell silent again, Simone and Julian stood in the ruins of what should have been his wedding night. The flowers, once symbols of celebration, now looked like remnants of a battlefield. Julian exhaled deeply, the exhaustion of months of planning finally catching up to him. "It's over," he murmured, but Simone knew better. This wasn't the end. It was simply the point where one disaster stopped and another, her marriage, her future, her healing, had to begin. Betrayal had been exposed. Justice had begun. But the emotional wreckage? That was something no detective, no plan, no public takedown could fix. That was hers to confront now, alone. In the days after the disastrous wedding, Simone felt as though she were drifting through the aftermath of a hurricane, moving, breathing, functioning, but with her spirit cracked open. The media storm erupted overnight, filling headlines with phrases like wedding scandal of the year, corporate betrayal exposed, and Rivers Group under attack. But none of the noise compared to the silence inside Simone's home, where every corner, every framed photograph, every piece of furniture still smelled faintly of Miles. She finalized the divorce quickly, refusing to keep even a single item tied to the man who had treated her heart like a business transaction. Once the papers were signed and her last box was packed, a heaviness settled over her, a bone-deep exhaustion that no sleep could touch. Julian insisted she rest, take time for herself, go somewhere far from the echoes of betrayal. For once, Simone didn't resist. She booked a trip to the Bahamas with nothing more than a small suitcase and a fierce desire to forget. And the moment she stepped off the plane and felt the warm, salty breeze brush against her skin, she understood why people ran to the ocean when the world broke them. The sea didn't ask questions. It simply received everything you carried. Simone spent her days walking barefoot along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over her ankles as if they too were trying to pull the pain away. The island was quiet, peaceful, a world so different from the glittering, deceptive ballroom where her life had shattered. She didn't visit tourist spots or crowded beaches. Instead, she found a small cafe overlooking the water, a cozy place made of wood, soft music, and quiet mornings. There, she scribbled in notebooks, trying to untangle the knots in her mind, drawing fragments of healing she wasn't sure she believed in yet. Every sunset felt like a small promise that tomorrow might hurt a little less. Yet, even in the calm, she couldn't escape the lingering weight of everything she'd endured. The betrayal, the deception, the revelation that her marriage had been nothing more than a strategy in a war she never chose. Some nights she cried without sound. Other nights she simply sat by the shore and let her thoughts float away with the tide. What Simone didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that healing often walks toward you when you're too tired to walk toward it yourself. One afternoon at the cafe, as Simone was sketching idly in her notebook, a familiar voice broke into her quiet bubble. "Small world, isn't it?" She looked up, startled, and saw the last person she expected. Damien, the detective who had helped unravel the conspiracy at the wedding. Gone was the stern police uniform. Standing before her was a relaxed man in a khaki jacket, the ocean breeze brushing through his dark hair. His presence surprised her, but in a strangely comforting way. They talked easily, first about the island, then about life, then, tentatively, about the night everything fell apart. Damien wasn't intrusive. He didn't ask questions meant to pry. He simply listened, really listened, with the presence of someone who understood what brokenness looked like in others, because he had carried his own. Over the next days, they met again, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident. They walked along coastal trails, shared coffee under palm trees, laughed about small things Simone hadn't realized she still had room to laugh about. There was no pressure, no rushing, no courting. Only the gentle unfolding of two lives crossing paths at exactly the moment they both needed someone who saw them clearly. What grew between them was quiet, slow, and steady, the exact opposite of everything Simone had lived through with Miles. Damien brought a kind of calm she didn't know she could still feel. With him, she wasn't the victim of a scandal or the sister in the middle of a corporate war. She was just Simone, a woman rediscovering life after the ashes. On a cool evening, as they sat near a tranquil lake watching the moonlight ripple across the water, Damien finally reached for her hand. His touch was warm, gentle, asking nothing except permission to stay. "If you let me," he said softly, "I'd like to write a better chapter with you." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a promise, simple and sincere. Simone felt her throat tighten, but for the first time in a long time, the tears that rose weren't from pain. They were from hope. She nodded, letting her fingers intertwine with his. The past was still a wound, yes. But sitting beside Damien, feeling the quiet strength of his presence, Simone realized she wasn't healing alone anymore. She had found someone who didn't just accompany her through the daylight, but offered to stay through the dark as well. The transition from pain to peace wasn't abrupt for Simone. It unfolded like dawn, slow and almost invisible at first. After returning from the Bahamas, she felt lighter, as though the ocean had carried away pieces of grief that had clung stubbornly to her. Damien moved back to Atlanta shortly after, requesting a transfer so he could build a life closer to her. Their connection, once tentative, deepened naturally as they discovered a shared rhythm neither had expected. For the first time in years, Simone didn't wake up with dread, but with quiet anticipation. Dinners were filled with laughter, evenings with long conversations, and weekends with slow walks through tranquil parks where she learned he loved nature as much as she did. He didn't try to fill the silences or fix her wounds, he simply held space for her to breathe. And in that simplicity, she found room for something new. A love that wasn't about winning, possessing, or manipulating. A love that stayed steady through her highs and patient through her lows. It was the kind of love she once believed only existed for other people. As their relationship blossomed, so did Simone's life beyond romance. She returned to Rivers Group, not as someone broken by the past, but as a woman determined to rebuild the future. Julian welcomed her with open arms, relieved to see strength returning to her eyes. Together, they poured themselves into expanding the company, ensuring Harrison's downfall would mark the start of a new era, not a scar. In time, Simone found herself thriving in ways she hadn't imagined. She took the lead on new international projects, impressed investors with her poise, and slowly grew into a respected leader. Her confidence, once fractured, was forming again, this time on a foundation untouched by deceit. Damien supported her every step of the way. He celebrated her successes quietly, never seeking credit, never overshadowing her accomplishments. Their lives intertwined not through dependency, but through choice, the most powerful bond of all. And as months turned into years, the echoes of her past betrayal faded into distant noise, like waves retreating from the shore. 2 years after the wedding disaster, Simone stood at a new altar, not under chandeliers and lies, but beneath a glowing sunset on a quiet beach. This time, the vows she exchanged were honest, tender, and deeply earned. Her wedding to Damien was intimate, attended only by Julian, close friends, and a handful of people who had witnessed her transformation. She wore a simple, elegant dress. He wore a soft smile that never left his face. The moment she said, "I do," she felt something inside her finally settle. Not long after, they welcomed their daughter Skylar, a joyful little force with bright eyes that reminded Simone that life, even when ruptured, could bloom again. Motherhood filled her with a warmth she never thought she would feel so deeply. Damien was a gentle father, often seen rocking Skylar to sleep or holding her tiny hand as if she were the most precious part of his world. Their home echoed with laughter, not the forced, brittle kind that had existed in her old life, but the genuine sound of a family healing and thriving together. Yet life, with all its beauty, rarely remains untouched by shadows. As Skylar grew and Simone settled into the comforting predictability of family life, small things began to stir a familiar unease. A car she didn't recognize appearing on streets she drove. A woman sitting alone on a bench at the park, watching Skylar play for just a little too long before disappearing. Simone brushed these moments aside at first, chalking them up to residual anxiety from everything she had endured. Damien reassured her gently, reminding her she was safe, that people admired her success, that strangers watching wasn't unusual. But deep down, a quiet instinct whispered that these weren't coincidences, they were warnings. And when Skylar's second birthday arrived, bringing with it a mysterious anonymous gift and a card signed from her grandmother, Simone felt something cold coil in her chest. Her mother was gone. She had no grandmother left on this earth. So who was watching her child? Who was calling themselves family? And why did the handwriting look so hauntingly familiar? Just when Simone believed she had escaped every ghost of her past, another had stirred. The birthday party should have been nothing but laughter, frosting, and the soft glow of candles reflecting in Skylar's bright little eyes. Friends and family filled the living room with warmth. Julian's son chased balloons, and Damien moved around the house with the ease of a man content in his world. But when the doorbell rang mid-celebration, something in Simone's chest tightened, a strange instinct she couldn't name yet. Damien returned holding a beautifully wrapped box, his brow creased with confusion. "No sender name," he murmured. The packaging was elegant, deliberate, the kind of gift that carried intent. Simone felt a chill even before she unwrapped it. Nestled inside lay a delicate white gold baby bracelet, custom crafted with a lotus pendant carrying a tiny diamond at its center. It was exquisite, expensive and intimate in a way that immediately unsettled her. But what froze her blood wasn't the jewelry. It was the small handwritten card tucked beside it. The calligraphy was elegant and soft, and the message was simple. "Happy birthday to our little girl," from her grandmother. Simone's heart dropped. Her mother was dead. Damien's mother lived far away and didn't write like this. Miles' mother had never cared for them. So who had written those words? The moment Simone saw the handwriting, something buried deep in her memory rippled like a stone dropped into still water. She grabbed the drawer where she had kept the mysterious white rose bouquet card from months earlier, another unsigned message congratulating her on a new chapter in life. She placed both cards side by side, same loops, same lettering, same delicate pressure, same writer. Her hands trembled. Fear crept up her spine like a cold wind. Someone had been watching her for a long time, silently, intentionally, intimately. And now, this unknown woman was reaching for Skylar. When Simone showed Damien the card, the detective mask slipped instantly over his features. His voice hardened. "This isn't a coincidence," he said. "Someone is circling our family." Julian arrived minutes later, and the three examined the bracelet. It wasn't generic, it was handcrafted, likely custom ordered. Julian's wife suggested it might be from a fan or business partner, but Simone knew better. There was something too personal, too knowing, too specific in the words "our little girl." The room, once festive and warm, shifted into an atmosphere of unease. Something invisible had entered their lives, something watching, waiting, moving carefully beneath their awareness. Over the next days, both men launched into action. Damien reviewed security camera footage of every street near their home, tracing the delivery service the box had come from. But the sender had paid in cash, leaving no digital trail. Julian used his corporate connections to contact jewelers across the state, hoping someone would recognize the bracelet's lotus design. No one did. It was as if the piece had materialized from thin air. Meanwhile, Simone tried to continue her daily life, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Every quiet corner felt too quiet. Every passing stranger felt too curious. She replayed every odd moment from the last year. The black car that followed her once but disappeared. The elegant woman on the park bench watching her and Skylar. The roses with no name. They weren't isolated incidents. They were breadcrumbs, signals. Someone had been inching closer all along, waiting for the moment Simone would start connecting the dots. And now that she had, the fear shifted into something sharper, a need for answers. A need to uncover the truth before it stepped any closer to her child. Unable to sit with the unknown any longer, Simone did what she had always done when life spiraled. She turned to the past. She drove back to her childhood home, a place untouched by modern chaos, still holding the quiet ghost of her mother, Carla. The old house smelled of dust and memories, each creaking floorboard whispering fragments of her childhood. She climbed into the attic, desperate for anything, a diary, a letter, a clue, that might explain who this mysterious grandmother could be. She sifted through boxes, albums, and outdated belongings until her hand brushed a small wooden chest locked with a rusted clasp. Something about it felt hidden, guarded. She pried it open and found a bundle of yellow letters tied with a purple ribbon. The handwriting on those letters was the same as the one on Skylar's birthday card. The first line stole her breath. My dear sister Carla. Sister? Simone's world tilted. Her mother had never mentioned a sister. The letter spoke of a car explosion, a life saved, a forced disappearance, and an unspoken debt between two women bound by tragedy. And then, in the final letter, a sentence that shattered everything Simone believed about her identity. I only regret leaving my 2 children behind. Tell them, I never stopped loving them. Simone's heart pounded violently. Her hands shook. Children behind. Her world, once rebuilt and steady, had just cracked again, revealing a truth she was never meant to uncover, and somewhere out there, the woman who called herself Skylar's grandmother was still watching. Simone sat frozen on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by forgotten boxes and fading memories, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The letters lay scattered around her like fragile pieces of a life she had never known she was living. Every sentence written in that elegant, haunting handwriting reshaped the foundation she spent her entire life standing on. Her mother, the woman she cried for as a child, the woman she admired, the woman she thought she understood, might not have been her biological mother at all. The truth pressed in all at once, heavy and suffocating. Carla Hayes, the gentle woman who raised Simone and Julian, was not their birth mother but the rescuer of the woman who was. Adele, the mysterious writer of the letters, spoke of an explosion, a violent attack, a disappearance that was not abandonment, but survival. She spoke of 2 children she left behind so they would be safe. And suddenly, Simone realized that everything she once knew about her past was just the surface of a story buried so deeply that even the people closest to her had never glimpsed its edges. The attic felt colder now, almost foreign, as if the house itself knew this moment was coming and had been holding its breath for years. With trembling hands, Simone collected the letters and drove straight to Julian's office. Her brother, the man who always had answers, the one who always knew how to stay composed, was visibly shaken as he read the words that rewrote their entire existence. For the first time in her life, Simone saw Julian's confidence fracture. He sank into his chair, staring at the last letter as though the page itself had betrayed him. No, this can't be right, he whispered, as if saying it aloud would undo the truth. Mom was mom, but the handwriting was undeniable, the details too vivid, the emotion too real. Adele had written of escaping death, fleeing across countries to protect the very children she had to leave behind. She wrote of guilt that consumed her, of love she could only express through letters she never dared to send. She wrote about the key to a Swiss bank vault containing everything she owned, meant for Simone and Julian once they were old enough to understand. And as the final letter trembled in Julian's hands, one line echoed louder than all the rest. They will one day know who they truly are. The weight of those words settled over the room like a storm cloud ready to break open. Damien, who had arrived upon Julian's urgent call, scanned the accident reports, the letters, and the old case files with the steady gaze of a man accustomed to seeing through chaos. His voice, calm and analytical, cut through the emotional shock. There's more here, he said. This accident, the one Adele mentions, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a cover. He pointed to inconsistencies in the autopsy reports. The burned body that could only be identified as female, the assumption that it was Adele, the lack of forensic certainty. Then he pulled up corporate archives, connecting dots Simone and Julian never knew existed. The president of Rivas Jewels, the company Adele's husband once owned, died in that same explosion. And who took over leadership immediately after the tragedy? Harrison, the same man who tried to destroy Rivers Group. The same man who manipulated Miles and Eliza, the same man who had haunted their family for decades. It wasn't coincidence, it wasn't fate. It was a pattern, a web of destruction woven by a man who had been building empires over the graves of others. Simone felt her stomach twist. Harrison had tried to destroy her family twice, once through her birth mother and once through her married life. The bitterness of that truth tasted like iron. The realization that her entire life had been shaped by the aftermath of Harrison's crimes left Simone gasping for air. She wasn't just a victim of infidelity or deception. She was the daughter of a woman who'd been targeted by a ruthless businessman and forced to disappear. She wasn't just the sister of a corporate heir. She was the surviving child of a family Harrison had once tried to erase. Every question she had ever asked about who she was suddenly felt sharper. The mysterious woman watching her, the cars with familiar handwriting, the expensive bracelet. It all connected to the woman who had fled decades earlier. The woman who called herself Skylar's grandmother. Simone wasn't sure whether the feeling rising inside her was fear, longing, or anger, perhaps a tangled mix of all three. One thing was certain, she could no longer run from the truth. The past had found her, and now she would have to face it. As Simone stood with Julian and Damien in the dim office, the three of them surrounded by letters, evidence, and 25 years of buried secrets, she understood one thing clearly. This mystery was no longer about who had wronged her. It was about who she truly was. And finding the woman who gave her life was the only way to finish the story her mother, both of them, never got to tell. It was Damien who finally spotted the final clue, a recurring name in hotel guest logs matching Adele's birth name. She had checked into a secluded mountain lodge only a few hours from where her letters had been written. And so, one cold morning, Simone, Julian, and Damien drove through winding roads into the Swiss Alps, hearts pounding with every turn. The lodge was quiet, snow dusting its rooftops like powdered sugar. When they stepped inside, the receptionist hesitated before pointing toward a small cabin behind the main building. "She's been waiting for you," she said gently. Simone froze. Waiting? Slowly she approached the cabin, her breath visible in the cold air, her heart racing faster than she could steady it. The door opened before she could knock. And standing there, wrapped in a simple sweater, hair silvered by time, eyes blue and unmistakably familiar, was a woman who looked like a softer, older version of Simone herself, Adele. For a moment, no one moved. Tears filled Adele's eyes as she whispered, trembling, "My beautiful girl." Simone's knees weakened. Julian stepped forward and stopped in his tracks just as Adele pressed a shaking hand over her heart. "Both of you. My children." And in that suspended moment, 25 years of pain, confusion, and longing broke wide open. The reunion was not loud or dramatic, it was quiet, aching, and deeply human. Adele explained everything. How Harrison had threatened their family, how the explosion was orchestrated to erase all traces of her husband's inheritance, how the only way to keep Simone and Julian alive was to disappear and leave them with Carla, the only woman Adele trusted with her life. She spoke of years spent hiding, watching from a distance as her children grew into the strong, resilient adults she prayed they'd become. She admitted to leaving the roses, the anonymous gifts, the cards written in trembling hope, afraid to step fully into their world, yet unable to stay away. Simone cried in her arms, grieving not just the years stolen but the years regained in this single breath of reunion. Damien held Simone from behind, grounding her as she shook with relief and sorrow. Julian, the unbreakable one, wept quietly against Adele's shoulder, shedding the weight he carried alone for decades. When the tears finally subsided, Adele cupped Simone's face with both hands and said, "I didn't come back to take anything. I came back because you deserve to know your truth, all of it." And just like that, a story that began with betrayal, heartbreak, and hidden enemies ended with something far more powerful. Truth reclaimed, family reunited, and the promise that no matter how long darkness lasts, light always finds its way home. The search for their true origins began quietly, almost reverently, as though Simone and Julian were stepping into sacred ground. Damien organized the files, cross-referenced timelines, and helped reconstruct the final months before the explosion that had supposedly killed Adele and her husband. The deeper they dug, the clearer the truth became. Nothing about that night was accidental. The explosion had been triggered in a jewelry company's private garage. a location only high-level employees could access. Financial records showed that the company had been thriving before the incident, and surveillance data revealed a lingering shadow figure just minutes before the blast. All roads led to one name, Harrison. He had seized control of Reva's jewels within weeks of the tragedy, claiming that Adele's husband had left the company drowning in debt, a claim disproved by archived ledgers Julian recovered through international contacts. But the most damning evidence came from a retired security guard who still lived in Switzerland. When Simone and Julian tracked him down, his voice shook as he confessed that he had seen the woman, Adele, limping away from the flames, face bloodied, clutching 2 passports and a small child's shoe. "She was alive," he whispered, terrified. But alive. And that was the moment Simone felt her soul shift. The mother she had mourned her entire life had never died. She had escaped. With the security guard's testimony, Damien coordinated a search across Switzerland, focusing on shelters, hospitals, and small villages near the border. It didn't take long before a pattern emerged, medical records marking a woman admitted under a false identity, discharged after 3 weeks, then vanishing again. Small traces of her life appeared like soft footprints. A temporary apartment rented for a month, a bakery worker who vaguely remembered a quiet woman with a limp, a school postcard addressed to someone named Amelia. It was clear Adele had spent years surviving in the shadows, slipping from one life to another, always watching, always protecting from a distance. And then came the breakthrough. Julian found a bank manager who revealed that the safety deposit box Adele had mentioned in her letters had remained untouched for 25 years, until 2 years ago when someone accessed it using an old key and withdrew a single envelope. The manager remembered her as a graceful older woman with striking blue eyes. Eyes filled with sadness. Inside the vault's remaining files was a scanned copy of a journal page, Adele's handwriting, dated just after Simone's wedding scandal. "They are grown now. I am free to watch from afar. One day I will return when they are ready to hear the truth." Simone felt her breath catch. Her mother had seen everything. She had been in Atlanta,